Last Sunday in November. And we're missing some folks this morning.
The Gendrys have had company all week. I don't know if they're coming this morning or not. If they do, it'll just be church.
Prayer requests. David Pratt. Oh, God.
What'd she say?
David Pratt.
Jeff Wright's brother.
Where's he live?
He lives in the center.
And what happened to him?
His house burned out, he got 33 birds on his face.
Is that the Wycliffe house?
Yeah, the Wycliffe house, his brother lives in the center, Jeff lives in the center.
Gotcha.
Yeah, right up on the hill. Yeah.
Yeah, he got 33 burns on his face and hands.
Of course, Jerry Dunn.
Trying to think, is that your
First cousin.
cousin?
My dad and his were brothers.
Come in.
Hey, we're up there in the Gentrys.
Oh, quiet.
Well, we were just trying to
Praying or talking about it.
You know, it's both.
We did.
It's both.
You survived,
That's right.
you survived having company all week.
They're still here.
Oh,
That's why you left,
you
didn't
did
you?
it well.
I said my sisters for a while.
Thank you.
We'll share. This is Freddie St. Dunn.
My first cousin. Yeah, he's 9 years older than me.
James, anybody heard from Freddie since?
6.
The last I heard, wasn't he gonna be there 7 days? And
Last I heard.
was going home after that.
Yeah, I just saw what Pat had put on there. I don't know.
Recently?
Yeah, just
Just
Thursday or,
Friday.
yeah, Friday.
Skin grass.
Yeah.
Starting.
Well, this is hard.
But we'll be praying for Freddie for sure. Yeah, I'm glad we don't have to deal with 6 feet of snow. There are those that are doing it every day right now, so.
Good.
Good morning, Cheryl.
Anybody else?
Cheryl tomorrow, he's having a test in the morning.
For test tomorrow.
She hasn't felt well either this week.
No, she does not.
Well, we're thankful that we had a good trip to Atlanta and back, nice and safe, and got a good visit in. The food was delicious.
Ron and Annabelle are traveling today.
They're headed to Bowling Green. I just talked to Matt, and he's on his way with them, and he's keeping up with Jerry. Maury and Matt are best friends, so Matt's been talking to Maury all morning. So
Good.
he's gonna keep me posted on that. Anybody else?
Patsy's on the prayer calendar.
Oh, yeah, up and around and running. Yeah, she looks like she's recovered very well. Definitely something to be thankful for. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Mike Hatler, will you open us, please?
Lord, thank you for this time that we can come to your
Obedience and celebration. What an appropriate title and appropriate lesson as we celebrate Christmas, right? It's the time of year that we begin our celebrations. We have Thanksgiving where we celebrate and give thanks to God for all the blessings that we've enjoyed throughout the year and throughout our lives. And then we go into the Advent season, which begins today, and we celebrate the historical, factual coming of the Messiah into the world, the incarnation of God Himself, Emmanuel, God with us. We light the candles every week, looking forward to that Christmas Day event. Well, thankfully, we'll be here at church to celebrate this year. So, obedience and celebration. In our lesson today, the Jews were given several times of the year where they were to come together and celebrate. There were the Feast of Tabernacles. There was Passover. There was eventually, there was Pentecost. There was all these times when they were supposed to come together and worship. Today we're talking about Sabbath worship, both every 7 years, once every 7 years, and then the Jubilee once every 49, 50 years. So we have 2 times in the Jewish calendar when they're supposed to experience this celebration, and the parts of those celebrations were so important. The forgiveness of debts, the freeing of slaves, it was all part of this celebration of who God was to them. So when we start thinking about why we celebrate and why we have holy days or holidays, let's look at that through that lens today as we go through our lesson. So again, Leviticus chapter 25, towards the end of the book, and we're in verses 1 through 12. Again, we're talking about 2 Sabbaths in which we're supposed to celebrate. Now, when you have the idea of a Sabbath, does that really just go to your mind as something where it's a party and you're celebrating? Does that title make sense just when you first read it? Celebration on a Sabbath? What are you supposed to do on a Sabbath?
Rest.
Nothing. You're supposed to rest on the Sabbath. It's supposed to be a stop of stuff. So when we think of celebrating, and Mike, Debbie, you guys have had family over this week? Friends? Somebody staying with you? Yeah.
House full.
A house full of family. Does it seem like a time of rest for you? Kinda. Oh, Mike says,
Well,
what?
I cook all the time.
Mine did the cooking, yeah.
Oh.
I may lay down on this pew here.
So is that what we get into our heads when we start thinking about decorating and preparing food and preparing, going to buy gifts? And when we think of these times of celebration, do we see them as times of rest? What would most people say? No. Most people say no, that they're not. I know when we ran to Atlanta this weekend, we had to prepare food, and we brought food with us to cook when we got there, and we cooked all day Thursday, and by the time we were done cooking Thursday afternoon, it was like, and then Friday I was like, I'm just ready to come home.
And then you gotta clean up after all.
Oh, then there's the cleanup after that, and I want to come home. And then Jessica, when we get home, we've got stuff we're going to decorate. We're going to start, it's after Thanksgiving. We're putting our Christmas tree up and the lights on the house. And I think we all get into that routine of holidays being less than restful. Would you agree with that? And most people would. So what God is telling Israel is that there is a celebration to be had in rest. A celebration and an honoring of God to be had in not doing. No amens to that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to see how it applies to us and how it applies to them too. So let's read the first 3 verses there. 3 or 4? 4. Let's read the first 4. We'll stop 1 through 4 in chapter 25.
And the Lord spake, chapter 25, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the Lord spake unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, What ye come into the land which I give you, Then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard.
Thank you, Sandra. So, context. Where is God giving this to Moses? Where is this instruction being passed on? Top of Mount Sinai. Still up there. Same place where Moses got the Ten Commandments, where he's been given all the rest of the commands about how to act toward God and how to act toward people. Now Moses is getting instruction on how to act even toward the land, toward earth. And God tells him a time. He gives him a time here. He says, Moses, not tomorrow, not the next day, but when you guys get into the land that I'm going to give you. It doesn't start today. It's going to start when we get over into Canaan. That's kind of an important part because a lot of people, a lot of scholars today believe that this Sabbath only applies when all of Israel occupies its land. So when the exiles started happening, when the northern tribes were taken away by Assyria, there are a lot of scholars that believe that the 7-year Sabbaths ended then because everybody wasn't at home. This was for the children of Israel. There are other people who believe that it happens, and you look at other scholars who say that this 7-year cycle continues even to this day. You go to Israel today, and there are signs on fields that are left fallow. I looked at that this morning, and there are signs that say, free for the taking. Come get it. This is a Sabbath year for the fields. Come get what you need. You can see those signs there. That was interesting. So, there are some ideas about how this is fulfilled today and how it was even fulfilled then. But God tells Moses, when you get home, when you get into Canaan, the land that I'm going to give you to use, it's my land, I'm going to give it to you to use. Every 7th year, you're going to let it go. The land will keep a Sabbath. Now, we had just read a couple weeks ago about what the Sabbath meant for the people. It meant they were not supposed to work. Sabbath means rest. It means not moving. It literally means to not do things. So, how does that apply to the land? God says, on the 6th year, you're going to sow, you're going to harvest. On the 7th year, you're not going to do nothing. You're not going to plow to dirt. You're not going to take a sickle out there and harvest your wheat that comes up. You're not going to do anything. Whatever comes up, you go and get what you need to eat. The poor can go and get what they need to eat. You can't harvest it like it was your regular crop.
But so they could, if they were low on food, they could go pick some grapes or whatever.
Yes.
They could do that.
They could do that, but they couldn't take tools out there to go harvest it like they normally do.
But did this stuff just come up?
Yep, this would have to be volunteer. Yes, what we would call volunteer stuff that comes up the next year. Because it was not sown.
What about the people that had animals? They had to feed their animals.
This is not, the animals that foraged in the woods and stuff, they would forage on the mountains, the sheep
I'm
was
talking
still
about if you
going
were a
to.
shepherd. You had 100 sheep, and that year come up. You sell them before the year?
No, you go take them up to the mountains where you always do.
Yeah. Looks like that would be work. Taking the
It's not about the people working, this is about the land.
resting.
Yeah, this is the land resting. People weren't supposed to rest in the 7th year. This was the land. The only people that were not supposed to work were the farmers that sowed the grain. Everybody else is still doing what they do.
You still have to feed your animals,
Yeah.
all large.
Yeah, this is the Sabbath of the ground, the land. The people were not supposed to farm.
That every 7 years it happens.
Yes, and like a crop rotation today or a fallow rotation today, there's still farmers that do that. Every so many years they'll let it go and not touch it. And there are people that will plant cover crops that year, maybe a grass of some kind, and let it just grow and replenish the nitrogen in the soil for a year.
I didn't know the grass or replenish the nitrogen.
Clover especially, a leaf grass like that does.
I read that in the lesson. I didn't know.
I know
Corn is terrible.
I know a guy in Crittenden County that let his land rest this year. he told me it was because of fuel and fertilizer so high.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I didn't think I could make a nickel on it. So I
People
just-
are making more money this year, but it's costing them more than ever to
Yeah.
put stuff in the ground. So it's negating everything that they make and probably eating into it
Yeah.
even more. So whereas people in the past would have made money on a year like this, they're barely breaking even just because of the cost of fertilizer and fuel and everything else, insurance, everything. So again, this is where we got to make a difference here. This isn't just the 7 days God established on that seventh day. Man's not supposed to work. This is for the earth to not work. I guess that's the way you can look at it. The earth is supposed to rest. Those farmers aren't supposed to go out there and sow or reap anything as if they were gathering it for profit. But they can go for their sustenance and still grab food off the vine and out of the field to eat, but they can't harvest it like it was their job. So all the other stuff, commerce is still going. You're still raising your sheep, your cows, your whatever, that's all still going on. But this is a rest year for the ground. Now, let's look at verses. This will give us a little more instruction in here, 5 through 7.
You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest to the land. The Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you, for yourselves, and for your male and female slaves, and for your hired worker, and the sojourner who lives with you, and your cattle, and for the wild animals that are in your land. All its yield shall be for food.
So the 6th year, when you plant that year, you're having some faith that the carryover into the 7th year and then the 1st year of the next cycle, because you're not just looking at year 7, you're looking at the beginning of year 8 too, before that first harvest. That first year of the next cycle, you're dependent on year 6 of the last harvest, right? Or whatever came up naturally from the land.
So it's 3 years of harvest.
3. So it's not just 1, it's not just 2, but you're looking into 3 years that 6th and the fallow part that comes up in that volunteer, that 7th year, is going to carry you into the 1st year of the next cycle. Whew. How much faith does that require?
I wonder what kind of system they had to store grain from this bountiful 6th year.
You know.
Well, they learned it from the Egyptians. The Egyptians already knew how to do it because of you know that because of the
Joseph
prophecy.
stored it up.
You already know this. And what does God tell in Habakkuk? He says, bring your goods into my storehouse. They're supposed to be bringing stuff into the temple storehouse as gifts all the time anyway. And I will pour out a blessing to you. God had already planned all this out. He'd already set it up all the way back in Egypt that they would know how to store grain. How long do they have to store it for Egypt?
7 years.
7 years. This should be nothing compared to that. So they knew, literally they knew how to do this already. So if they were giving their tithes and taking care of their offerings into the temple like they were supposed to, the temple would be the place where they could go when they ran out of field food to go and take care of their needs. That's what's supposed to supply. God was supplying for them. Do you see a truth in that today? Do you see the same kind of truth that's supposed to be operating in our churches today? Do you see the same type of truth that was operating in Acts chapter 3 and 4 and 5? How they were having all things common among each other. They were sharing as each had need. Pretty important truth that begins way back in the early parts of recorded history. God had given them the plan to do this. Now, how often do we forget that? How lackadaisical, that's not the right word. How lack-of-faithical are we that we forget that God is over everything? This was to remind Israel that this was God's land He was giving them, and He was going to provide for them through the land. Even if they quit work on that land for a year, God was still giving them more than enough. It should remind us of the manna in the wilderness. It should remind us of every time God provided water as they walked through that wilderness. It should remind them how many times God had provided. But how many of us would be unwilling to have faith like that? To trust God that's going to provide. Don't we feel like we need to be doing?
In studying the lesson, it sounded like they never did celebrate a Jubilee, which I don't get to that. Did they even celebrate a Sabbath year?
Yes. And we'll get to some of that tonight. It's arguable how well they did it, if they ever did it completely. I'm even talking the Sabbath years. There's rabbinical writings that people were getting in trouble and being prosecuted in the temple because they were sneaking in and planting in the Sabbath year and pretending that it came up on its own. So there's record of that people were not following even the Sabbath year requirements because they didn't trust God with the right. That goes back to my question. Doesn't that sound like us? Don't we feel like we need to put our hands to the plow and we need to be making sure
We think that even on Sunday.
we do, don't we? So the Sabbath rest for the year, for the ground is important. And on page 174, why did God command such a practice? This is under food in the 7th year. It's the answer to question 4. Why did God command such a practice? We have come to learn that it was a sound agricultural practice. The 7th year let the land lie fallow so that it could replenish its nutrients for the next 6-year cycle of planting. The Sabbath year, however, was more than just an agricultural issue. It was a year set apart to the Lord. The Sabbath year undoubtedly was a reminder to the Israelites to take God's Sabbath cycles seriously. Man, that's hard to say. And to trust Him for food in the year they did not plant. We struggle trusting in God to provide. How much of this world works so hard every day to make sure they're providing for their families, or they have enough. It's the rat race. That's what we call it. It's just people spend all their time and all their efforts trying to get what they think is necessary. And God's economy is totally different. God's economy says, yeah, work 6 days. 6 days is a lot. 7th day, you rest. We don't follow that. 6 years, you bust your tail and do all that you can. And then on the 7th and 8th years, trust me, I'm going to take care of you. No, we can't do that. We can't trust God to do that. We've got to keep our hands to the plow. We've got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And God says, that's not even good for the ground to do that. If it's not good for the ground, I promise you it's not good for us. If God's concerned about the earth and the contents of the soil, I promise you He's concerned about you too. He's concerned about your well-being and your faith. He's concerned about you. We know that. So, just another little tidbit on this. In the next page, on page 175, it says the crop of the 6th year would be so abundant that it would be sufficient for that year and for the next 2. As in the provision of manna, God would supply for them if they obeyed Him. Before we leave this passage, we should consider 3 other issues relating to the Sabbath year. I want you to take a note on these. First, Exodus 23 states that the year was instituted to help the poor. So another reference to this Sabbath year comes from the book of Exodus. But the 7th year, and this is a quote, but the 7th year thou shalt let it rest and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard. So, first of all, it's to remember that we're to, again, have compassion. Last week we talked about our farming and how we're not supposed to glean the edges of the field and make sure we leave stuff for folks to eat as they pass by. This is a whole year devoted to that, to make sure that we have to enforce compassion. God's trying to force that knowledge on His people that we're supposed to care for everyone. Second, the Sabbath year was also to be accompanied by two other actions: releasing people from debt and reading the law to all the people. The canceling of debt every 7 years probably prepared the people for the greater cancellation of property transactions and servitude in the Jubilee year. How do you feel about canceling debt every 7 years?
Sounds amazing.
There's always side of the fence you're on.
Yeah.
If you are the leaser or the lessee,
Yeah.
should it matter what side of the fence you're on?
Nope.
Why?
That's what he said.
And primary answer, because that's what God said. Second, it's God's anyway. Why do we think we have ownership of any of this? Why do we think just because our name's on a title of a house or a car or a piece of property or whatever, why do we think that's ours? What happens when we die? Whatever that was goes right to somebody else. You don't take that with you. God is the owner, and he's trying to make a point here to the Israelites too, that this ground that he's given them, it's really his. Treat it like it's mine, and you won't care if I tell you to give it to somebody else. How many people that you know are really close to God that do that with their finances today? That treat their stuff as if it's God's and don't mind giving money or giving a car or giving whatever. God gave me this to give it to somebody else. That's a truth he's trying to instill in the Israelites by making it a law. We don't have to live by that law today, but the truth is still there that we really don't own anything. It's all God's to begin with. We just get to use it for a little while.
I think the government stepping in to provide for people has caused us to be like something.
Amen. I'll agree with that 100%. They've taken the role of the church and done it their way, so to speak. Deanna's laughing at me about something.
Trying to say it the right way.
Yeah, I'm trying. All right, so let's look at the third thing there. The Sabbath year was so important to the Lord, he determined the length of the Babylonian captivity by the number of times his people failed to observe the 70th year. So was it important to God? Jeremiah, the prophet, says, this is why you're going into captivity, is because of these Sabbaths that you didn't participate in, you didn't do. That's why you're going in. That's part of why. That's maybe not exactly why you're going in, but it's how long you're going in is going to reflect it. How long you're going to be in captivity is a reflection of how long you robbed from God. Did you try to do things on your own, and you ignored his rule? So, does that indicate that it's an important aspect of the Jewish culture? Yes, it does. Is it an important aspect? Is there a truth there that we need to carry with us? Absolutely. There's a reason there should be joy and celebration in the rest, and that God provides. God is the author of everything. God's the owner of everything. There are things that we need to recognize that aren't us. This takes the focus off of us and puts it back on God. Maybe there are some things we can learn from that. All right, the last half of the lesson, 8 through 12, talks about the year of Jubilee. Now, the word Jubilee there comes, and there are two arguments here about what that word comes from. One of them is Yobil, which is a shofar, it's a blowing of the horn. And there's another word that translates to yowl, like howl, that means it's a shout of celebration. So there's some biblical scholars that go back and forth whether it was the horn or the shout, but they both indicate the same thing. And as the history of Jubilee progressed, it was to begin with a blow of the horn. So the idea that shofar horn was blown, and that word is so similar that's how it got ready. So Jubilee, the English has turned that into a party, right? We've turned that word into something that means a celebration, a get-together, a time of joy and exuberance. But it all goes back to a word that means either shouting or blowing the horn. to let the people know that the year is kicking off. Some people on New Year's Eve set off fireworks. For the people of Israel, they were supposed to kick off this year of Jubilee with a shout and a blast of the Lord. So that's a little history about the word. So who would read 8 through 12?
And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years. And the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 40 and 9 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land, and to all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man into his possession, and ye shall return every man into his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine unto rest. For it is the jubilee, it shall be holy unto you. You shall not eat the increase thereof out of the land.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, we're doing math, right? We're taking the calendar and we're doing math. 7-year cycles. We get to the 7th one of those. That last Sabbath is going to be followed by another Sabbath. Now, believe it or not, there are some people, and I don't believe this, there are some people that believe the 50th year is actually the 49th year, but they count it twice. There are rabbis in Israel today that are arguing the fact that it's not truly a 50th year, but they count that last year twice. Why? Because it gets you off your 7-year cycles. You have a year that's set apart. I agree. I think there's a year that's set apart. But there are some rabbis that believe that the 7 years is just 7 years. And then that last, the Jubilee year is considered a double year. Because it's both a year of Sabbath and a year of Jubilee. I like to think that it's 49 years and then that 50th year that's set apart by itself, then they start counting again, 1 through 7. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody or not, but it does to me.
You know, I've read before that there's no record that they ever kept the Jubilee.
There are people that believe that in Ezekiel, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, Ezekiel chapter 40, that he is referring to a year of Jubilee during the captivity. So I've read several things about that. To me, the jury's still out. I don't know for sure. But if Ezekiel is referring to it during the captivity, that kind of throws a bunch of things on its head. So I don't know. I've got to do a little more studying about that this afternoon. I really don't know. There's nothing recorded that I see in Scripture that says, all right, this is the year that they did it. But there's a lot of timekeeping a lot of people have done over the years based on this. It's really kind of strange. We talked a couple of months ago about how Israel's calendar, the Jewish calendar, is very different from ours, and they've got extra days and stuff. This is another one of those examples where, depending on the rabbi that you follow, they have different counts of what the Jubilee year is, even today, when it's supposed to be and when it's not. I can't answer. That's a lot of words for me to say, I can't answer. But what was it supposed to look like? What was it supposed to represent? What was it supposed to be? What was the purpose of this Jubilee year, this extra time of rest, and what accompanied it? What is it in what we just read? What are the characteristics of this year of Jubilee that began with the blowing of this horn?
Proclaiming liberty.
To who?
Everybody.
All the inhabitants of the land.
The inhabitants of the land. What land is that?
Israel.
Israel. It doesn't account for the diaspora. The Jews that were all over the world throughout history that have been scattered, they did not have to adhere to this. There are scholars today that say that Jews in America don't have to follow this because this is specific to Canaan, Israel, the land that God gave Joshua to spread out. That's what the target is. All right, so all the inhabitants of the land And at this point, who were supposed to be the inhabitants of the land? Again, this is 14 years before they go across the Jordan.
14 years.
It's several years before they go across, and then it's another, I think, 7 years before they capture most of the land. It's several years before they go across. I won't say 14, because I think it's 14 after they cross when people say they had their first Sabbath, because they still hadn't run everybody out.
They were fighting before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're looking at several years before they go across, and several years before they take ownership of everything. Who were the inhabitants of the land supposed to be?
Only the Israelites.
Only the Israelites. Did that ever happen?
No.
No, it did not. Israel was never the sole occupant of the land. There were lots of people that were left.
Because they didn't obey God.
Because they didn't obey God. And so the idea here was this was going to be the ideal. God's telling Israel, this is what the ideal situation. You're going to have a Sabbath every 7 years. At the end of 7 of those, you're going to have another greater, bigger one, where all of your people, all of Israel, is going to be brought back up. Anybody that had been brought down because of debt or because of indentured servanthood or whatever, you're all going to be brought back up. You're all going to get to go into your old family's homes and houses and property. All that's going to be brought equal again. No one's going to have too much. No one's going to have too little. All the scales are going to be balanced at the end of this cycle of 50 years. From all intents and purposes, we don't know that ever happened. You're going to hallow the 50th year, proclaim liberty throughout the land. Every man that has sold a house or sold a piece of property is going to be able to inhabit that house again. Every person that sold himself into slavery or a person in his family into slavery, they're going to be set free and be allowed to go home. They're going to be set free and allowed to go home. Sounds beautiful, right? Sounds wonderful. What's God trying to tell or teach his people with this?
I think it goes back to what you said earlier, that it's all his anyway. Verse 23, I highlighted that some time ago. It says, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, and you are strangers and sojourners with me.
The land is mine.
And you know, on page 175, the first sentence under the scripture in the right column,
Yep.
God considered the land to be his land. I don't think considered is a good word. He should have said proclaimed that the land is his land. Considered, to me, thinks maybe so, maybe not.
Not to mention, it's only a partial truth. All of the land is God's land,
Oh, sure.
not just Israel.
Yeah.
But why was this land going to be different?
It's chosen people.
He's for
That's his chosen people. Because he chose them. Just as he chose this land. Again, I think that's where that word considered from. He chose this land in addition to his people to be an example, to be a light. It wasn't just the people, but it was the land, the area, the mountains. All of those were going to reflect, everything in that land was to reflect who God is. There's going to be a new Jerusalem come down. There's going to be no doubt about that new Jerusalem, who the owner and proprietor of that new Jerusalem is. He's going to be the light in it, right? The old Jerusalem, the old Israel, was also supposed to be a light to the people. The land was supposed to be a light. The people that lived there were supposed to be a light. And from the very beginning, their failures continued. They continued. They didn't move all the people out of the land. They didn't participate in all the Sabbaths and the Jubilees. They didn't treat people like they were supposed to. They held on to their slaves. They didn't return land. It wound up having to be this. It couldn't be done. So, what does Jesus teach us in this? What do we learn from Jesus about all of this idea of Sabbath? Whether it's the Jubilee year or the Sabbath years that lead up to it, What in the New Testament, what about the nature of Jesus do we learn from?
Well, we learn directly from Jesus that the Sabbath was not created. How do you word it? Sabbath was not created for man, but man is.
No.
And we're,
Man was not created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was created for man.
when Jesus stands up and opens the scroll of Isaiah, what does he quote? Who remembers that quote from Luke, I think Luke chapter 4?
Proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord.
Liberty of captives. It's the Jubilee year. It is that year Jesus is saying, it's here.
I'm here, yeah.
With me.
I'm with you.
I bring the Jubilee here. I bring the forgiveness of sins, the balancing of the scales, the canceling of the debts. Jesus brings that. Jesus is our Jubilee. That's the truth that we're supposed to get here. So if Jesus is canceling our debts, boy, he taught us some lessons about forgiving others, didn't he? Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. There is a whole lesson about how we should be living the year of Jubilee right now. We should be living our lives as if it were the year of Jubilee right now. As Christians, the Jubilee is here.
Mhm.
As Christians, the year of rest is here. Of spiritual rest is here. We don't have to strive for the sacrifices and the holy days and the temple worship and all that stuff. That is gone. But our year of spiritual rest is right here. That's why we can celebrate Emmanuel, God with us. Isn't that which candle is that? It's the pink one. It's the last one we light in Advent. The God is here with us candle. That's how we get to celebrate this whole idea of Jubilee. Now, on page 170, we're out of time. That's, Belle has a room, she's going to walk through this door any second. 177, there are 5 practical benefits for celebrating like this. 5, and if you guys get a chance, we'll study those tonight. Take a look at them this afternoon. And then we're going to hit the preparing to teach the lesson section, specifically the concluding the lesson. Those are very, 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 oh, that was all. So those 5 practical things we'll talk about tonight, and we'll dig into concluding the lesson. Lord, thank you for this time together. Thank you for your word. Lord, help us to live the year of Jubilee in our lives. Help us to forgive as you have forgiven, Lord. Help us to understand how we have been forgiven. Help us, Lord, to love like we're supposed to be generous like we're supposed to celebrate you being here with us. And that truly is worth celebrating. Thank you for this time of worship. Lead us into it, Lord, with your Spirit. In Jesus' name we pray.